Hey everyone, welcome to this video covering difficulty settings in Forza Horizon 5. By a long shot, the most common question I get asked while streaming is, what settings are you running? Or what settings should I be running? So I figure this is probably a good quick topic to cover in a video because I don't think a lot of beginners fully understand what each setting means, which settings make you faster, or which ones matter more than others. So let's jump in, and I've left timestamps in the video so you can skip directly to the sections that interest you if you'd like. Now first, I want to quickly discuss the gameplay implications of changing these settings. You'll see on the right a difficulty bonus percentage, and this multiplies the amount of money you get from races by whatever percentage is shown. The harder you make your settings, the more bonus money you make. Don't worry about this. So much of your income in-game comes from sources that aren't affected at all by this multiplier. So just apply the settings you want and don't worry too much about the money. On that note, the first setting here is for Drivatar difficulty, and this has been a hot topic with the release of Horizon 5 because AI is much harder and cheats the physics much more blatantly than it has in previous games. Like I said with the credit bonus, don't worry about this. Just play on the difficulty that's fun for you. Don't be afraid to turn it down to match your skill set. And as a reminder, that goes for all of the settings I'm going to talk about today. Although I'm going to cover, of course, what settings I think players should be using and why, and which ones are important for making you a faster driver, it's just a suggestion to help you make your own decision. Ultimately, you should always play your games the way you want to. Alright, let's jump into the big 5 settings here. Braking, steering, traction control, stability control, and shifting. With all of these settings, the leftmost option is the easiest, and the rightmost option is the most difficult or realistic, and often the fastest. Some settings matter a lot more than others, and some even have some exceptions, and ultimately, being a good driver is more important than any of these. And I can't stress that enough. A good driver on slow settings will outdrive a bad driver on fast settings. But if you are interested in being more competitive or more realistic, the right settings here can absolutely help you shave some time off your laps. Alright, so for braking, we've got 3 options here: assisted, anti-lock on, or anti-lock off. Most all players should be running either anti-lock on or anti-lock off. Assisted will take control away from you and make you significantly slower. The difference between ABS on or off though is small. Leaving ABS on essentially lets you mash the brake input whenever you need to slow down without ever having to worry about the wheels locking up. The car will adjust your braking pressure for you, and this makes gameplay much easier. If you have ABS off, you'll have to manage your braking pressure by yourself, making sure not to lock up the wheels or you'll lose traction, lose steering ability, and slow down your overall braking speed. Good ABS off braking is ultimately faster than leaving ABS on, as ABS tends to err on the side of safety instead of absolutely maximizing your tire grip to slow down as fast as possible. Players with a wheel and pedal setup will find managing the brakes much easier, and although I still suggest starting with ABS on, you'll find the transition to ABS off easier as it feels more natural to adjust braking pressure when you have an actual brake pedal. For gamepad or controller players, I suggest leaving ABS on, unless you are pushing for top rivals times or really want the sense of control. Although turning off ABS is theoretically faster, if you mess up only 1 or 2 corners in a race due to wheel lockup or under braking, well, you would have just been better off leaving ABS on because it's much more consistent, especially for beginners. I play with ABS on almost all the time, and only turn it off if I'm really fighting for a top 100 or so rivals time. If you're shooting for top 1% or even top 1000, you can absolutely get there with ABS on, and you won't be at a disadvantage in online racing either. Consistency is often the most important element to racing, and ABS, while technically a bit slower, is more consistent for most players. Now finally, a note for keyboard players. You should really just always leave ABS on. It's essentially impossible to adjust braking pressure on a keyboard outside of feathering the brake key really quick, but it's really not worth the effort. Any bit of time you could have saved by turning off ABS could also be saved by just taking a slightly better line, I promise. So let's move on to steering, where we have a pretty similar story. Steering gives us 4 options: auto steering, assisted, standard, and simulation. Auto steering and assisted, just like assisted braking, will be much slower and take control away from you. So the big debate is between standard and simulation. In Horizon 4, this made a much bigger difference, but now in Horizon 5, standard and sim steering are actually very similar to each other, and I'd argue equally as fast, or probably near as makes no difference. Both standard and sim steering use the exact same physics, but standard steering is going to dampen and smooth your input a bit, making the car feel more stable and allowing you to use more aggressive controller input while making sure the car doesn't react as aggressively. Wheel users should always be playing on simulation steering. Although it doesn't make nearly as much of a difference as it used to, simulation is going to feel more responsive and accurate to a real car. For gamepad users, honestly, I find it comes down to personal preference. You're going to feel the difference mostly on corner entries and mid-corner corrections. Sim steering will react quicker, but feel more darty and less stable, while standard steering smooths out those entries and corrections, making the car feel more smooth and planted. For drifting, I'd lean towards simulation. It helps you transition faster and use weight shift more effectively. But for rally and road racing, the differences are minor, and you should just drive what you prefer. As someone who normally plays on a gamepad, I used standard steering for Horizon 1 through 4, but in Horizon 5, I've made the switch to simulation steering. However, keyboard players should use standard. Like with braking settings, having the ability to just press the key to turn and letting the game dampen and smooth the input for you is pretty helpful. And although sim steering on keyboard is possible, again, I just don't find it worth it. Alright, now we move on to traction and stability control. Ideally, you want to move towards having both of these off, as they will make you a much faster driver. Traction control will cut power to the wheels when it notices them spinning, which ultimately means you can't use all your power when you need it sometimes. And traction control will completely hinder your ability to drift as well. Wheel, controller, and even keyboard players should strive to turn this off, unless you're really struggling to keep control of the car. Throttle control, even on keyboard, is the key element to learn here. Instead of the game deciding when you do and don't need power and how much, you should be the one deciding that. Even 1000 horsepower rear-wheel drive S2 cars are controllable if you learn good throttle control. You should also work towards stability control off as well. What this does is prevent you from oversteering by slowing down individual wheels of the car to balance you back out. Now, of course, this will prevent you from drifting properly as well, but this also slows you down quite a bit in corners when in a race or rally setting. Again, all players should try to keep this setting off if your goal is to get faster. Alright, now we come to the final major setting, shifting. We've got automatic, manual, and manual with clutch. Automatic, of course, does all the shifting for you. Manual means that you will have to shift the gears yourself, but not worry about the clutch, and manual with clutch is the full manual experience. This is one of, if not the biggest improvement you can make to your speed and driving ability. All players should try to learn at least manual shifting. It gives you an incredible amount of control over your car and will make you so much faster. It may be difficult to make the shift from auto to manual, but give it a few days, focus on the sound of the engine instead of trying to always look at your tachometer, and it will become second nature. In time, you'll be doing it without even thinking. I've encouraged a lot of beginners to make the switch, and every single one has told me that it was worth it and that they enjoyed the driving even more after they started to feel comfortable with manual. So should you go even further and try manual with clutch? Well, this one is very situational. In older cars that shift slower, adding the clutch setting will allow you to shift significantly faster than manual clutchless players. In drifting, having a clutch gives you the option to clutch kick, which is especially helpful on lower powered builds. However, in more modern cars and cars with upgraded clutches, the manual clutchless setting can shift just as fast or even slightly faster than manual with clutch. So for this reason, I'd suggest that wheel players play on the setting of their choice. Use manual with clutch if you have a clutch pedal, but only manual if you want to use the paddle shifters. Gamepad and keyboard players should default to manual clutchless, but understand that there are some situations where you may want to add the clutch, mainly in drag racing, drifting, and lower powered road racing. I, again as mainly a gamepad player, spend about 80 to 90% of my time in manual clutchless, only swapping to the clutch setting when I need to in rivals, or sometimes drifting. Alright, now let's wrap up by covering the 3 bottom settings here quickly, starting with driving line. Even as an expert player, there's no reason not to keep your braking line on. This does totally come down to personal preference, and some people don't like the visual overlay on the road, which I totally understand. The full line especially is more distracting than it is helpful. But I do see a lot of people thinking that they should work towards turning the braking line off, or thinking that it's a noob setting to have the braking line. It's a free advantage, and unless you don't like the visuals or really want the extra bonus credits, you should keep it on. Some may argue that it leads to too much reliance on the braking line visual instead of just learning actual braking distances, and that's valid to a point, but since you'll never be without the visual in Horizon, I think it's okay to rely at least loosely on the braking line. And with a big open world game and a route creator, you're always being faced with new tracks and corners. So having the braking line to help you judge distances on new corners or know that a corner is coming without having to look at the minimap is simply helpful. Now, damage and tire wear is, of course, entirely a personal preference, but it's worth noting that this won't affect online play, so if you want to play with full damage in single player, you'll still be defaulted to cosmetic only in online. And finally, for rewind. Just like the braking line, it's a free advantage. No reason not to take it unless you really want the bonus credits. And that's gonna do it. Again, remember that everything in this video is just a suggestion. Play how you want and prioritize what you want. But that said, I do hope this helped you understand what to prioritize and what may or may not be an important setting to try and change. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.